Okay, as happy as some of you might be to be back, I am happier. I'm very happy to be back. Not yet at full strength, but hopefully this will give me the boost. I did discover something 10 minutes before class tonight. I keep having to send out a new link each time. And for those of you in Misyat Sharim, it's a shorter link. And I figured out tonight how to have one link for all my classes, repetitive, and I'll be able to use the same one for all three classes. So Shalom Yisrael, starting with next week. Bezrat Hashem. I know this was keeping you all up at night, worrying and just concerned about it. So I figured I'd share that good news. Okay, where are we holding? We are in the middle of chapter 12, Perek Bet. I'll put the text on the screen shortly. But just as a reminder, where we left off, we spent pretty much an entire lesson on just a few words. I'm going to recap that in just a matter of a couple of minutes, and then we're going to move further into this chapter. So the issue was that the Admor HaZaken, the Alter Rebbe, it made what sounded like a very outlandish statement. And he characterized the Benoni as a person who never sinned and never will sin. And we addressed two problems with that. The obvious one is, what do you mean he never sinned? Everyone sins. And number two, how can you say he never will sin? That's first of all, there's two reasons you can't say that. You can't make such a promise. Number two, what about Bechira Chofshit? You have free choice, so it's possible. So we spent quite a bit of time on that. He's not saying he didn't sin ever, nor will he ever sin. But I want to read to you. First, I want to tell you my encapsulation, and then I'm going to read you a note I wrote in my book when I was learning this, and I think it'll work and help also here. He says like this: we remember that when a person does an avera, they do a sin, and they do tshuva, it's kiyul tshuva that sin doesn't exist. Didn't happen. Yes, if a person injured another person, damage was done, and he has to pay for it. We're talking about the blemish to this individual, that this avera is kiyul didn't happen. So the Benoni has done tshuva for his averot, and so he didn't sin because it's kiyul doesn't exist, and he won't sin, meaning that if he's tempted now in the same avera, he's at the mental state, the spiritual state, that he's not going to do it. Doesn't mean he won't ever do it, but it means right at this very moment, he's not. So I want to read to you something I wrote down a couple of years ago when I was learning this. And I think if I found this helpful, hopefully you will too. So, an Aveira I never did is almost impossible for me to do. The ones I did yesterday, a week ago, a month ago, I can't do them again. Why? We'll see soon. We became weak in that area. So in a way, the past exists in the present. It's impacting my Avodat Hashem. If you've done an Aveira, if you've done a sin, you are weak in that area and you cannot be a Benoni. When the Rebbe says, Lo Avar, he did not sin, it means that he did tshuva and is no longer impacted now by that Aveira from the past. Meaning, when a person does sin, let's say I'm a person who talks Lashon Hara. So that means that past of mine, speaking Lashon Hara, impacts me in the present because it continually helps feed the monster. But if I've done tshuva for that, then it doesn't exist. So my past is not impacting my present. What does it mean, v'lo ya'avor, that he will not sin? Since the state a person is currently in, the state of commitment and devotion that he's in, he won't falter. It does not mean that 5 years from now he won't sin, but it means right now, ba'asher hu sham, as he is right at the moment, he will not. Tomorrow he might sin, but at this moment, as a Benoni, he cannot. But why? How? How do we know that? So first we need to see what makes a person a Benoni. That was part of the first question. The second part we had to deal with was, why isn't he a tzaddik? Why isn't he a tzaddik? And that's where we left off. Because if he, in his present state, he's done tshuva, he hasn't done sins, in quotes, because it's wiped away. He isn't going to sin because he's not being tempted at the moment, and he's not sinning. And even if he were tempted, he's hopefully at the point where he's not going to. How is he not a tzaddik? So you have learned enough Tanya already. When we talked in the previous chapter, in chapter 10, when we talked about the tzaddik, you should already have enough knowledge to understand to answer that question, but we're going to go look at it now inside the text. As soon as I find it on my screen. Here we go. Okay, let's make this a little bigger for all you. Okay, here's where we're going to pick it up. So we're leaving off, or the intro to this statement is, why is this person not a tzaddik? So we're going to see. It's going to take us a few minutes to get to it. So let me read a number of lines and explain what he says here. And I will only give you one thing to keep in mind right now as we read this, and that is, when you say Shema, starting tomorrow morning, your approach to Shema and the brachot that come before Shema should, as a result of what you're going to see now, absolutely alter your relationship to the brachot before Shema and Kriyat Shema in the morning. And for the evening too, especially in the morning. Okay, that's your little teaser for what we're about to do. So let's read, starting from the very first line here. Mahut ve'atzmut nefesh elokit, the actual essence of the neshama elokit, shein eser bechinoteha. Remember, we saw that there were 7 and 3, the chokhmah, bina, and dat, and then the 7 tchunot. Lo lahen levadan hamlucha v'hamemshala bi'ir k'tana. They don't, in a benoni, have complete nefesh elokit does not have complete control, meaning it's thought, speech, and action at all times over the ir k'tana, meaning the person himself, his body. Remember, we said by the tzaddik, he has complete control at all times of chokhmah, bina, and dat, or his machashava, his thought, speech, and action at all times. But here in this case, when we're talking about the Benoni, that the essence of the nefesh elokit does not have complete control over the person's body. Only at specific certain points of his day. Kemo, for example, Bisha'at Kriyat Shema Utfilah, at the time of saying Shema and the time of davening, the Nefesh Elokit does not during the rest of his day potentially for Benoni dominate over his Nefesh HaBahamit, but during Shema, and we'll see details in a minute, and during Tfilah in general, his Nefesh Elokit dominates his Nefesh HaBahamit. How? Why? Shehi Sha'at Mochin Degadlut Lamala. This is a very difficult thing to translate into English. We will see a little bit in the commentary when we look at the slide. Basically is a higher level of consciousness in a sense from on high, from Hashem, that when a person's davening, he has that ability to connect to. When a person's davening, when a person's saying Shema, person saying, we're going to see in a moment, the brachot before Shema, there is this awakening in heaven, so to speak, that it's, and again, I'm using very physical terms for a very spiritual action. These feeling, this aura, this ray of what's called mochin de gadlut lamala comes to this individual, connects to this person down here, and is a shat hakosher for this person. A shat hakosher means it's an appropriate time. It's an auspicious moment where there's a connection. Now, before I get any further, I want to explain to you what this means in different terms. At one time or another, every one of us has been in a situation where it could be maybe only once in your life, I hope not, but over time, maybe hopefully many times, where you are absolutely blown away by the grandeur of God, by the magnificence, by the magisterial concept of God. Whether it's the first time you might walk into a shul after not being there for a while, maybe it's being at the kotel, maybe it's going at some lookout point and seeing some magnificent, breathtaking view of Israel, whatever it might be. That moment, that little spark, magnifying that is what we're talking about here that connects us to Hashem even greater at the moment of Tfilah in general and Shema specifically. How? Look at the next words. I'm right here. It says, Sha'az Mikasher. Sha'az bekasher chabad shalo. At that moment, he connects his chokhmah, binah, and da'at. Those are the three levels of consciousness and knowledge. We talked about them early in the book. The differences between the chokhmah, binah, and da'at, which all of them sound like they're the same thing. It means wisdom, intellect, knowledge. But we said that da'at was the deepest because it meant a connection. Like we say, vayeda adam and chava ishto. So again, Sha'az Mekasher Chabad Shalo, because at that moment he connects his Chokhmah Bina and Dat LaHashem LaHamik Dato B'Gedulat Ein Sof Baruch Hu, in order to delve into, to become deeper in connection with Hashem. The Ein Sof is another name for Hashem, which means the infinite. Ula'orer et Ahava Kerishpe Esh. What does it do? It awakens the love of God at the level of Rishpe Esh. Remember, I told you from the very beginning, this is not a book you can pick up in the middle. It has building blocks, and this is one of those building blocks we did a long time ago. That the two basic types of love, Rishpe Esh, which was this burning love of God, which is not sustainable, and it's very different than Ahavad Ta'anugim, the calm, mellow, consistent love of God. But at this moment, there's this awakening of Rishpe Esh Ahava, this kind of love, this burning love. It exists at that moment, again, spiritually, in the right side of his heart. To cling to God, that you will able at that moment. It may not be sustainable. He's going to say it's not in a moment. But for that moment, your connection to Hashem is stronger, and it's out of love and the desire to keep Torah mitzvot. This is what we mean by the concept of the Kriyat Shema. Reading Shema is a Torah-based obligation. And the brachot that we say before Kriyat Shema are also important. They are rabbinically ordained that we have to say those brachot. What's the purpose of those brachot before Shema? Hein hachana lekiyum hakriyat shema k'mo shekatati b'makom acher. They are a preparation. You're not just saying something. You're not just mouthing words, but the saying of the brachot before Shema, we're going to talk about that in a minute, is a preparation for saying Shema. How? How does it happen that when we say the brachot before Shema, it's a preparation for us to say Shema, and it enables us to get to a higher level? Hang in there. Let's read a few more lines, then we're going to go back. Ve'az, and then, I'm right over here. Harash b'chalal smali, the evil. Remember, when we talk evil, we're not talking about being a bad person. We're talking about an essence here. The evil that's in the left side of the heart, kafuf ubatel latov. Sounds familiar. This sounds like when we talked about the tzaddik, that the left side of the heart becomes kafuf or subjugated by the right side of the heart. At that moment, when the person is saying the brachot before Shema, and the person is saying Shema, and the love of God is awakened, and this connection is stronger, and the desire to do Torah and mitzvot exists for even just for a couple of minutes, at that moment, the person's a tzaddik. Basher Husham. And now, spoiler, I'm not going to read yet a little bit more. That's why the person's a Benoni, not a tzaddik. Because what we're talking about is a short window that happens with the Benoni. His right side of his heart does not completely subjugate his left side, because then he'd be a tzaddik, like we saw in chapter 10. It's telling us, though, that there is a window, at least one a day or two a day, where that's different, and he's on a higher level. Let me read a couple more lines, and we're going to look at a couple of the slides. Let me go to the next here. And here's the downer. Here's the bummer. Aval achar hatfilah behistalkut hamochin legadlut ein sof baruch hu. When those special connectors, so to speak, from on high, leave after you finish davening, harei hara chozer v'neor b'chalal hasmali. The ra, the evil is reawakened into the left side of the heart. And once again, he has these desires that he had like he did before he said Shema. Let's take a look at a couple slides because there's a lot still to unpack here, even though we haven't really completely finished the thought. Let's go back and take a look now. Here. Hold on a second. No, this is the wrong slide. It's the next one. Sorry, we did this one last time. Make it smaller. Right. For those of you who know literary terms, you probably learned them in high school. In English, if you did it, you learned the difference between a metaphor and a simile. A simile compares two things using like or as. A metaphor does not use like or as. In Hebrew, a dimui is a simile, and a metaphor is a metaphor. So he's going to say that just so you can understand this word he's about to use. Now we said that in spite of the fact that this person didn't sin, now remember, we're talking the language now of the Admor HaZaken. He didn't sin, and he's not going to sin. He is yet to still have complete control over his Ir Ktana, his little city. So he says like this, if we're going to continue with the simile of the Ir Ktana, which really it's a metaphor because it doesn't say Ki Ir Ktana, Etzel Tzadik goresh ha'oyev me'ha'ir ha'ktana ba'ofen she'enu mehave od iyum. What is the difference? What is the technical difference between the tzaddik and the benoni when it comes to, relatively speaking, how he protects his little city, meaning himself from ra, from evil, from temptations? But as a tzaddik, he has completely banished the enemy from this little city, from himself, in such a way that it doesn't even present a threat any longer. And he doesn't even have a need to be on guard because he's been able to banish it completely. It's a Rasha on the other end of the spectrum when it comes to the Rasha. Even if he's a Rasha v'tovlo, and I'm not going to explain that because we went in that tremendous depth last chapter. And even if this Rasha v'tovlo has spent a large part of his time doing Torah, mitzvot, masim tovim, nevertheless, as a status of a Rasha, the enemy enters and exits his body at will, meaning, and that's the metaphor, that his inability to control his desires, they come and go at will. The ha-benoni. So where does the benoni fit in all this? Notice the tzaddik on the one hand, it's not only is the oyev or the enemy banished, it's not even in thought anymore. By the Rasha, it's the exact opposite. That no matter how much good he's doing, it's still he has free will. The enemy, the Yetzer Hara, whatever else it might be, has entry and exit to him. But the Benoni, on the one hand, the Benoni does have control over the Ir Ktana. Because the oyev, the enemy, can't enter him. Aval Benoni chayav b'chol ed la'amod al mishpar. The Benoni has to always be on guard. Because around his little city himself, there's always this other side, the Sitra Achra, the Yetzer Hara, the temptations. Doesn't ever get tired. The Yetzer Hara is always there. So therefore, when it comes to the Benoni, the Sitra Achra, which I'm going to loosely translate again as the Yetzer Hara, is no less than it is by the Rasha. Even connected the Benoni, it's still a strong force, but in principle, in actuality, ha-Benoni sholet aleh. The Benoni doesn't give an entryway for this Yetzer Hara. So let's just kind of summarize this because it's important to understand for other things coming later. The tzaddik has been able to banish completely is the Yetzer Hara. Ad Kedei Kach, he doesn't even have to be on guard for it anymore. Rare, of course. The Rush at the other end of the spectrum, no matter how good he is, even if he's a Rasha, a Tovlo, should 85% of his life he's doing mitzvot and all these things. Nevertheless, the Yetzer Hara has free entry in and out of him. The Benoni is literally in the middle, somewhere between those two. That the Benoni still has the Yetzer Hara. It's still a struggle, but the struggle is external, meaning he's been able to keep him out. He has to be on guard. He's not letting him in, but it's there, as opposed to the tzaddik that's not even there. Now, we did say that the place that this spark happens, that this connection happens, has to do with the time of saying Shema and the brachot before Shema. Why? What's so special about that? Why? I can understand maybe the Shema itself, but why the brachot before? What does that help us with? So let's take a look. We already said before that the mitzvah of Kriyat Shema in the morning and the evening is Minat Torah. This is the text that we read already. That we know the brachot that before Shema and after Shema are all rabbinically ordained. They are a preparation, the brachot, for Shema, as I said elsewhere, which we're going to deal with much later in Perek Mem Tet. We're in Perek 12. This is in 49, so we won't get to it next week. Now he's going to explain to us what's going on. This is again, it's Rav Steinsaltz. Kriyat Shema hi bisodo shel dvar hatzhara shel hanefesh halokit. Shema fundamentally is a declaration made by the nefesh elokit, by the godly soul. Where does he come up with that? We've talked about this before. We will talk about this again. That when there was a Jew going into the gas chamber, when it was Daniel Pearl who had a sword to his neck, when there's a person who is in trouble, when a person is dying, the one thing that seems to come out from a Jew, no matter how far they may have strayed, Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. That's the Nefesh Elokit coming through. Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad is that Hatzara Shel Hakara. It is this declaration of recognition that what? That statement that we make at the beginning of Shema is a declaration of love. Yes, the statement is, and you shall love Hashem your God. But what it is a declaration of my saying, I am at least willing to make that effort to have that love for God. In order to get to that level of love of God, to love God with your Yetzer Tov and Yetzer Hara, lo dai b'hatzarat kavanatah shel hanefesh elokit. Saying v'haftat Hashem Elokecha b'chol levavecha b'chol nafshecha is not sufficient to get you to that point. So why? Tzarich shetitpa'el gam hanefesh habahamit. You have to get your nefesh habahamit involved. How? You got to get it moving. L'shem zeh ba'ot habrachot shelefaneh ulachareh. Therefore, it is for this reason, and hang in there as I read the next 4 lines, that we know the nefesh elokit is involved by saying Vatat Hashem Elokecha. But in order to make it real and to make it penetrate, to make it overarching, we need to make sure that the nefesh bahamit is involved. And how do we do that? By use of the brachot before and after Shema. Why? How? Habracha rishona berkat yotzer or. The first bracha of yotzer or metaeret et gedulat olamot. If you've never really thought about the words in the paragraph right after Baruch Hu, before we say Shema, look at those words tomorrow. Look at them as if you're seeing them for the first time. And you will see it describes the grandeur of all the different worlds, the malachim, the ofanim, the seraphim. These are different types of angels. Why? In order to show them your nefesh habahamit, your animal soul, where does her nefesh habahamit come from? We don't pick it up at super soul. It comes from Hashem also. We talked about that in the very beginning of the book. And nefesh elokit and nefesh habahamit are from God. By mentioning in the bracha of Yotzer Or Ofanim, the Srafim, the Malachim, the Olamot. That's supposed to remind and tell the Nefesh HaBahamit, hey, guy, you are from Hashem too. Bracha Shniya. The second bracha, Avat Olam. Some say Ahavar Abba, depending on your nusach, which we'll talk about later in the book. Avat Olam mita'eret Ahavat Hashem Eleinu. It talks about how Hashem loves us. It's an expression from Mishlei. I'm not going to get into it, but just basically means that it's a concept of reflection that Hashem loves us and He wants us to love Him in return. The brachot, the two brachot before Shema that are instituted by the Chachamim, mataratan efo lahavi et adam mitoch hakara, mitoch hitragshut emotionalit, hitiyachasut amitit al HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The goal of those brachot are to bring a person through recognition, through emotion, to connect to relate to God in a true way. Shota anu mevatim b'kriyat Shema, which we then declare and express with Shema, Hashem Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. So what is he telling us? Something absolutely amazing. The Alter Rebbe said very on a surface level, well, you have the Shema, and you have the brachot before, and you combine them, and now you have that special spark from above, and you have your movement because of Shema. Bang, you're right there. You're just completely, the Nefesh Elokit is overwhelming the Nefesh HaBahamit at that moment. But why? How does that happen? What are the mechanics? So Rav Steinsaltz explains to us that when you're saying the Shema, the V'ahavta Shema, by the way, it's not V'ahavta. If you say V'ahavta, not only is it wrong, you might have to repeat you've never said Shema, because V'ahavta means and you loved. It's V'ahavta. The accent's on the last syllable. It means you will love, you should love. Don't go home, don't go saying, oh my God, never said Shema. You have. B'diavad you're Yotze. But to do it the right way, you have to say V'ahavta. Like it's V'achalta, V'savata, U'verachta. Anyways, I'll get off my soapbox. Let's come back here. So when you say V'ahavta Hashem Elokeinu b'chol havacha v'chulei, that's your Nefesh Elokit. It's been put into practice at that moment. It's this declaration of complete, utter love of God. But where does your Nefesh HaBahamit get part of that? It's the run-up to that V'ahavta. It's those two brachot before. When we talk about the Olamot, we talk about the different worlds, and we talk about the Malachim, and we talk about the Seraphim, and we talk about the Ofanim, all these different angels and these different levels, things that we truthfully cannot really understand. Wait till we get later in the book, and it talks about how big the Rakia is, how big the firmament of heaven is. It's a really interesting discussion when we get to it. But once you stop for a moment and not say the words only by rote, if Hebrew is not, even if your Hebrew is your first language, look at the English. Take a look, even if it's before davening, especially if it's during davening. Stop. Look at those words, because that's supposed to do is to try to get your Nefesh HaBahamit and your Nefesh Elokit involved in the same moment. At that moment, when you do that and you make the declaration, Shema Yisrael, at that moment, you're like a tzaddik. You have, how? Because what do we say the definition of tzaddik was? The definition of tzaddik was that his chalal yamin, the side, the right side of his heart has completely dominated the left side, i.e., his Nefesh HaElokit is dominating his Nefesh HaBahamit, and then we've done it. Now, yes, it hasn't completely eradicated it, no, but you're touching on the fringes right now of being a tzaddik for that moment. Let me see, where was I here? I see. Okay. It tells us what? That at that moment, you see here, that at that moment, we have this incredible connection to Hashem. Let's see what he says right here in the middle of the slide. It says, Uvota sha'a, hanefesh kula, oseket, chaya, usrufa, b'toch ha'inyan eloki. At that moment, when you say Shema, and you're not thinking about what you're going to be going to shopping later that day, you're not thinking about what you forgot to do yesterday, you have to do later, and you're not mentally saying, oh, I get better message so-and-so, but you're focused on the words. And by the way, when I'm telling you this, I'm telling this to myself, honestly. when you're not doing all these other things and you're focused, what has happened at that moment is your entire neshama, your nefesh elokit, your nefesh bahamit, is this consuming love of Hashem hasn't been engaged. Gama benoni beiti mizumanot. So too the benoni at certain times, kasher mitpalel or korei kriyat shema, when he davens or he says shema, yachol lasot zot belev shalem. He can do it with a complete heart. Be'ota sha'a at that moment, ein hitorut shel chalakim acherim betoch nafsho. There's nothing else that's involved in his mind and his heart at that moment. Ein bo kol ratzon decheshek acher. He has no other desire. El hitmaser kulo, but to give himself completely, yishpoch nafsho, to pour out his soul lifnei Hashem. When you think about it, on the one hand, this is a very, very tall order. And on the other hand, it's extremely simple. Let's put it into human terms. This is the easiest way, I think, to think of it. You walk out of the house. If you have a spouse in your house, you walk out the door, have a good day, love you, bye. Right? Now, the words I love you, as you walk out the door, one foot's out the door already, are they this deep, passionate, I can't wait to see you again love? Is that what's indicated by that? Generally, no. No, it's usually, I love you, catch you later. But when you sit and you have a deep conversation and you look in each other's eyes, and the concept of love and emotion and respect and care for each other, and the words I love you, the same three words, have a completely different connotation. So on the one hand, it's very easy to say, just here's the program. Focus on the brachot, focus on the words you're saying in Shema, and you're at that moment, you're raised at unbelievable height. But it's also not easy because what happens? Our brains get in the way. What does that mean? We're supposed to be using our brain to do this. But we can't, as human beings, we cannot think of two things at the exact same moment. We think we can, but it's not really happening at the same moment. It's like we can't speak two things at the same moment. Only Hashem can. That's why we say Zachor v'Shamor b'dibur echad on Friday night in L'Chadodi. So what my suggestion is, before we even continue, my suggestion is, starting already tomorrow, try. Even if it's only sometimes, you're doing yourself an unbelievable favor for reaching an unbelievable height by focusing on those brachot and focusing on Shema when you say them. Now, doesn't that mean that I'm a hypocrite? Because, wow, I'm really focusing for those 5 minutes or those 3 minutes, but after that, I got 23 hours and 57 minutes where I'm not. Does that make me a hypocrite? That is a topic that will absolutely be contained and be discussed at length later on. That's first of all. That's why I'm mentioning it now, not only because I know it's coming up later, but because I'm sure it's going through some of your minds. But the other part is that we talked about this before, that and we talked about it in Mesilat Yesharim, we've talked about it in Tanya, that even if you aren't completely on the program, but if you could get this awakening, you get this boost a little bit. We said, like right now in Mesilat Yesharim, we're dealing with the topic of being a chassid, of being a pious individual. Now, most people cannot maintain that level of what's necessary 24/7. But if you are able to do it for a period of time, for an hour, 2 hours, at that moment, you have reached the level of a chassid. Same thing here. When you have been able to read Shema, the brachot, and read Shema by itself properly, with the right focus and the right concentration, just understand the words. Hashem says to you, I can't make this any clearer. I love you to pieces. This is a relationship. I want a relationship with you. If God came knocking on your door tonight, well, don't call me. But if God came knocking on your door and said to you, listen, Mrs. Yid, Rabbi Yid, Mr. Yid, just listen for a minute. I love you. You have no idea how much I love you. I just want you to love me back. I want a relationship with you. I mean, you'd melt just out of just the sheer emotion. And that's part of this goal, even if it's temporary, the goal of this idea, what he's trying to tell us here. Let's take a look at one more thing. The difference between the Benoni and the Tzaddik is that Benoni does not have complete control over himself yet. Now, why do I say yet? Is the goal to be a Tzaddik, or is the goal to remain a Benoni? It's a question we're not going to deal with maybe for a very long time. But I'm going to tell you why I said yet. A number of years ago, this happened in Russia. I think it was in Russia, Moscow. There's a number of organizations that are funded by the Joint, by federations in North America. One of them is called Adayin Lo, which means not yet. It's a very interesting name for an organization. Basically, it's somewhat of a cure organization. And the idea being that, look, they don't put on tefillin, Adayin Lo, not yet. But the goal is to get there. They don't say brachot, Adayin Lo, not yet, but the goal is to get there. So right now, Adayin Lo, we're not yet at the level, maybe not even the level of Benoni. Maybe as we've seen, most people seem to be, again, that doesn't mean they're bad people. We're talking about this whole inner struggle of the Rasha. But right now, let's see what he says about this idea. He's not, a Benoni does not have complete control over his ir tana. Again, I'm not going to have to repeat it again, but his little city, meaning himself. The Benoni has desires. Aval Benoni eno Rasha, ineno Rasha. But the Benoni is not a Rasha. Yesh hevdel. There is a difference. Mahuti visodi bioter. An essential and fundamental difference between the two. Beno Benoni la Rasha. Kasher Rasha mitavetava mitavot haolam hazeh. When a Rasha has desires for whatever it might be, hu gam motzi ota lefol. He puts it into action. He takes action. Right? He wants to eat without making a bracha. He wants to go steal. He wants to say lashon hara. Im lo b'maaseh harei al kol panim b'machshava. Or if the Rasha doesn't put it into practice, he'll put it at least through his brain and start ruminating, thinking about it. Ha-Benoni l'u'mat, but the Benoni, on the other hand, eino yachol lotzi ta'avoto mikoach el ha'po'al. He is unable, at least for that moment, to take it from potential to practice and to do it. Hitoruta ta'ava, the awakening of a desire, hadechef harishon, that first push. Kayam etzel Benoni. He also has the desire. He also is there. Lo pachot mishu kayam etzel Rasha, no less than by the Rasha. Aval, k'dei shedechafim rishoniyim yagiu lidei bitzua, in order for those initial pushes that he may feel to come to fruition, tzarich shetiyeh lehem shlita l'adam, they have to overpower, so to speak, this person. Ve'ilu ha-Benoni, but the Benoni, lo'olam eino enhu nimtza b'shlitat hara. He's not under the thumb or under the control of the Ra. Mishpat ha-melucha, pasach hasofi, ma yaseh adam, eino natun b'hachatat biladid shel hara, enhu yachol lahotzi ta'avato el ha'po'al. He does not have the ability at that moment to take that ta'ava, desire, and put it into action. Okay, so let me take this off of here for a minute. So what's happening here? We've seen that through the brachot before Shema and the Shema itself, the person is able to change, at least momentarily, his relationship with Hashem. The obvious, which maybe not so obvious, and he doesn't even say it here, he will later, is to build on that. Because you don't want that to be just 3 minutes or 4 minutes out of your day. That's first of all. Second of all, we also want to understand, we said that this lasts as long as he's davening. It lasts as long as he's saying Shema. Well, because then things change. Life, quote unquote, gets in the way. So now what? How do you protect against that? How do you deal with that? That's what we're going to pick up Bezrat Hashem next week. So for those of you who are in Mesilat Yesharim, we are back in person and on video tomorrow, Bezrat Hashem at 9 a.m. And in the meantime, I wish everyone a wonderful evening. Stay healthy.